Number 10. Magic. Ileana Rasputina is Colossus' younger sister. She originally joined the X-Men with some basic teleportation powers. At a young age, she was kidnapped and taken to Limbo by Belasco. She also got some sweet magical training. Belasco put part of her soul in a bloodstone and told her that he loved her while she was 6 years old. Yeah, it's creepy. Creepy. And while she was in there, she was also beaten, and it wasn't until her rescue by Shadow and Cat, and later her continued training under Belasco, that granted her the power to overtake her kidnapper and become the Queen of Limbo, and eventually leave this reality she was trapped in. Upon her return to the X-Men, she was souped on magic, had her teleportation powers, and was also armed with her weapon, Soul Sword. She kind of gave me some Leona vibes from League of Legends, which just adds to her powerful presence in my mind. Number 9. Colossus. That's right, Magic's big bro, Pyotr Rasputin, is also on this list. Given the codename Colossus, after agreeing to attend Professor Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, he is able to change his skin to armor at will. His armor is durable, strong, and almost impenetrable. To give you an idea of just how tough Colossus is, I will point you to a moment where he took on the Juggernaut. Yeah, that's right. While his armored skin is susceptible to damage from adamantium and vibranium, his armor is otherwise impenetrable. And you all saw how much of a beating he took in the first Deadpool movie when he took on Angel. Oddly enough, the Deadpool version of Colossus is more accurate than the X-Men film version of him. I guess we'll see if Colossus gets to remain as overpowered and Russian in the MCU. But hopefully we will be safe from American Colossus, because that's a version that maybe needs to be stopped. Number 8. Archangel. One of the original founding members of the X-Men, Archangel, also known as Warren Worthington III, was first introduced in X-Men comics in the first issue of X-Men Volume 1, although at the time he went by the name Angel. This X-Men was born with actual wings, though his parents apparently did not notice the markings on his back that would lead to him growing wings later, and for the most part, he lived a normal life, somehow concealing his wings. Odd, right? At an early age, he became a vigilante hero, adopting the name Angel, and after joining the X-Men later changed his name to Archangel. Doesn't sound like he needs to be stopped, right? Well, think again. During the X-Factor series, he received a devastatingly overpowered upgrade when he became one of Apocalypse's Horsemen. He grew biometallic wings that were retractable, razor sharp, and could fire neurotoxin feathered darts. Ouch. Don't worry though, Archangel was stopped, in a sense, reverting to his former self after his biometallic wings molted. Yeah, because apparently metal feathers also molt? I don't know, who knew? Number 7. Storm. One of the most unique X-Men in terms of her origin story, Storm, also known as Aurora Monroe, was worshipped as a goddess when her powers first emerged, in contrast to most of her fellow X-Men who were, spurned for their abilities. While most of what we see in the comics and animated and live action adaptations is Storm's abilities to influence only localized weather, when prompted, her powers can be as dramatic as her accent in the X-Men film series from the 2000s. Storm suffers from some intense claustrophobia stemming from childhood trauma, and it is this fear that has prompted her full potential to be unleashed. Look at X-Men Volume 1 Issue 147, where Aurora creates a severe storm that encompasses the whole Earth, threatening all of humanity, and being likened in the issue to the Phoenix. Adding Storm's powers into the mix in a world that is already suffering dramatically from global warming is next level risky. The world definitely doesn't need any more large-scale natural disasters, thank you very much. Number 6. Cyclops. Often the leader of the X-Men team, Cyclops made this list less for his abilities and more for his sometimes questionable behavior and choices. He has some of the weirdest powers for someone who is an original member of the team. The ability to basically fire laser beams from his eyes. This power is so intense that it actually requires Cyclops, aka Scott Summers, to wear a visor in order to control his powers. Granted, apparently his eyelids are also strong enough to stop the lasers completely, which is weird, but hey, mutants, superheroes, comics. Moving past this ability, which can be very dangerous when left uncontrolled in and of itself, we also have to deal with the moral dilemmas created by some of Scott's actions. In Avengers vs. X-Men, his actions led to the return of the Phoenix Force and death of Charles Xavier by his own hand, after becoming full-on obsessed with the power of the Phoenix. Cyclops also tends to be loyal to his beliefs to a fault. In House of X, when steered towards Magneto's philosophies, we see him turn borderline villain, trying to forcefully separate mutant children from their non-mutant parents in an effort to protect them. Yeah. Number 5. Hope Summers, not biologically related to Scott Summers. She's actually adopted into the Summers and Gray family. Hope has the potential to actually be the strongest X-Men out there, the most OP. She can duplicate other mutants' powers just by being near them. Similar to Rogue, but she doesn't actually need to make physical contact, and she doesn't drain them of life energy or their own powers while duplicating. However, it still makes her a formidable foe for any mutant. She can also take on a seemingly unlimited number of powers at a time. So if you team her up with a huge X-Men team, she would be pretty unstoppable. Combine this with the fact that she was raised by the badass Cable, and you have a next level X-Men on your hands. Not only this, but the Phoenix Force has always been fond of Hope. When Hope and the Phoenix Force merged, she became the White Phoenix, the only person who appeared to be able to not be driven mad by the Phoenix's power. And she was the only one strong enough to dispel its energy with the help of Scarlet Witch. That isn't overpowered. I don't know what is. Number 4. Wolverine. Is there such a thing as too much Wolverine? I'd like to say no, but at this point I'm starting to think there just might be. Wolverine is now seen as probably one of the most popular X-Men and superheroes of all time. He has even held Avenger status, making everyone obsess over the thought of perhaps getting to see him join the MCU in the Avengers Infinity War Endgame post-credits, which sadly for Wolverine fans did not happen. Wolverine, aka James Howlett, or better known as just Logan, boasts of a mutation involving retractable bone claws and regenerative healing abilities. After having adamantium added to his skeleton, he became even more powerful. He has had more thrown at him than most superheroes, and as a result, we have seen his powers expanded in the comics. He's also known to age slowly, one of the few characters where we actually address this issue of, like never seeming to age. At one point he was even considered immortal, having a pact with Azrael, the Angel of Death, that if he could beat him in a fight after dying, he would get to be resurrected. In Old Man Logan, when he's actually considered to be weaker, he still manages to battle an alternate version of the Hulk. Granted, Logan really only needs to be stopped if you feel like you've had too much of him. Have you? Number 3. Rogue. With her power-stealing and life-draining abilities, Rogue, aka Anna Marie Lebeau, is one of the most insanely overpowered X-Men around. Considering she has also played the villain before, she might also be one to consider, putting a stop sign in front of. Like hold up. Before joining the X-Men, Rogue was a runaway who was taken in by Mystique and the Brotherhood of Mutants. She almost killed Miss Marvel, now known as Captain Marvel, by touching her. Rogue was used to temporarily taking mutants' powers and weakening them, but in Miss Marvel's case, she held on a little bit too long, stealing Carol Danvers' powers in a more permanent sense and leaving her in a coma. Rogue also accidentally absorbs her psyche without intending to. Her level of powers and lack of control are the most concerning. Though of course, in the X-Men Legacy series, Rogue gains full control of her abilities after Danger and Professor X were able to figure out how her abilities work and alter her mind to help her gain control, allowing her to kiss Gambit. I love those two together. Number 2. Professor X. What's more terrifying than a mutant who can read your mind and the minds of everyone else on the planet all at once at any distance? One who can also influence your mind, possibly without you knowing. Hence why Professor Charles Xavier makes number 2 on the list. Granted, Professor X usually uses his abilities for good, but as we see in the film Logan, even the best intentions may not protect those you love from the darker sides of one's powers. In Logan, we see an aged Professor X masterfully played by the only Professor X in my mind, Sir Patrick Stewart. This version of Charles is suffering from a degenerative brain disease that affects his memories, causes seizures, and causes him to lose control of his powers as well. And we learn that the worst has happened. He has supposedly, accidentally, used his powers to kill members of the X-Men and hurt countless numbers of people as well. Yikes. Poor Patrick Stewart. Number 1. Jean Grey. The only person unchained who could be scarier than Professor X Unchained would be Jean Grey, especially when under the influence of the Phoenix Force. You may be thinking at this point that the Phoenix Force is the real star of this list, and hey, you may be right. I definitely have a Phoenix obsession of my own. However, the fact remains that what the Phoenix Force really gives you is access to your full potential. And this is terrifying with Jean because her full potential is insane. Granted, originally in the comics, Phoenix was a separate entity that existed while Jean was chilling and healing in a cocoon under the ocean, but in the films and animated series, Phoenix has been presented as a melding of minds, which is also how it has been explained in later comics like with the Phoenix Five. Jean is one of the strongest X-Men ever, a stronger telepath than Charles Xavier. While her influence over a mind may not be as finessed or as subtle as his, she could definitely control your mind in a similar way. The only difference is you would probably know she was doing it as opposed to maybe thinking the actions were of your own volition. While both of these scenarios are equally terrifying, the idea of knowing you have no control over your actions while trying to fight back and losing is, in my mind, even more terrifying.
And at number 10, Karma. Karma is a character who first appeared in Marvel Team-Up issue 100 back in 1980. She came from Vietnam, having fled the country with her family during the war. She was one of the founding members of the New Mutants. Now Karma has powerful psionic abilities that allow her to physically possess others, meaning she can take possession of the minds of humans or animals. This occurs by Karma projecting a psionic energy surge that overwhelms their consciousness and renders her victim unconscious, with Karma's own mind taking the wheel, so to speak. When Karma is in control, she can do some real damage, having the ability to alter her victim's memories, perceptions, reveal information to her, or have them fall asleep. She can even make their body work as if it were an extension of her own. But if she stays too long with a host, she risks her own personality becoming a subordinate to that host personality, becoming more and more like her victim. After an incursion with the Shadow King, Karma also gained the ability to mentally see through others' eyes, and she can protect herself from the psychic assault of others. Moving on to number 9, Joseph. Joseph, who only operates by a first name, is the clone of Magneto, but kind of sucks in comparison to him. This is why he's a bit baffling to some. He is a mutant clone who first appeared in Uncanny X-Men issue 327 from 1995, but he also died in a battle against the real Magneto and had a thing for Rogue really briefly. Now his abilities in theory should be the same as Magneto's if he's the iconic villain's clone, right? Well, that is not the case, hence why he's on this list. Sure, he is capable of generating powerful magnetic fields, but he can also generate electricity and electromagnetic radiation. And the real kicker? Well, he doesn't have the full range of Magneto's powers. He never demonstrated the same extent of those powers or some of the tricks that Magneto has been able to pull off over the years, like producing a wormhole. He lacks the mental barriers Magneto has, and therefore when he manipulates a ton of energy, he often causes damage to himself. Sucks for you, Joseph no last name. Moving on to number 8, Husk. Many people might assume that Husk has shape-shifting abilities, but that is not the case. The character who first appeared in ROM Annual Issue 3 in 1984 has the ability to remove one layer of skin, or husk if you will, which then reveals a different layer of skin made out of an entirely different composition. So essentially, she sheds one layer of skin, and the layer of epidermis beneath can be something the likes of metal or stone or something entirely different. She's a metamorph who has made her skin into glass, wood, rubber, diamond, granite, brick, and even adamantium in the past. This can increase her weight, strength, or invulnerability in the process depending on the material. So she becomes diamond, she becomes impervious to an extent. Rubber, she gets bouncy. She even once generated heat and flame and has even produced acidic skin. Now aside from being kinda gross, think of like all that dead skin she sheds, it's easy to see why some would mistake Husk for a shapeshifter. Although technically speaking she kind of is, but it's a weird process in which she does it, and very limited, can just be her skin. And at number 7, Sage. Sage is a character who debuted back in 1980, appearing in the X-Men issue 132, and she has a variety of mental abilities that can often be a tad confusing. Think of Sage like a supercomputer. Her brain has unlimited storage capacity, she can recall anything at any time with perfect clarity, and the speed of her thoughts allows her to analyze her surroundings for data within seconds, almost instantaneously. She's like a back computer. In addition to that, she can calculate probability of events based on said data. Sage can multitask too, completing various actions all at once in her brain. And if that wasn't wild enough, she has perfect control over her body because of her superpowered mind, meaning she can recreate any physical actions that she's seen once, as long as they are within the parameters that her body is capable of. She can even see a person's genetic code and read their DNA, and selectively evolve existing genetic traits, which can tap into latent abilities, although she can't reverse the procedure, which has caused unpredictable side effects in the past. She is a walking, talking bat computer. Up next at 6, Lockheed. Lockheed is a literal dragon. Well, actually he is an alien dragon who was Kitty Pryde's longtime companion and a member of both the X-Men and Excalibur teams. First appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 166 from 1983, this little dude does a lot more than just your typical dragon stuff of flying and projecting fire. And he is also the size of a cat, which is kind of super adorable. Lockheed comes from a race of advanced dragon-like extraterrestrials who can travel through space via astral ships that transport their essence, which kinda seems absolutely absurd. Now, because of his empath abilities, he is able to understand human speech despite not being able to speak it all that well, and is immune to telepathic probing. So he's not just a cat-sized dragon after all. Although, I mean, would you rather have a real dragon or a tiny dragon that was cat-sized? Personally, I would go for the cat-sized dragon. Much more manageable and, like, adorable too. And at 5, Ravage. Ravage, who debuted in 1993 in X-Men issue 17, is one of a few characters on this list whose powers are not only confusing, but so is their origin story. So Ravage's early appearances were plagued by continuity errors in Marvel's comics thanks to one of her creators, Fabian Nicieza, failing to read Uncanny X-Men issue 255. In that issue, the character Psylocke is discovered on the shores of an island by the Hand, whereas in issue 22 of the second volume of X-Men, a handful of issues after Ravage's debut, her origin story contradicted the one in Uncanny X-Men, with the character having come to possess Psylocke's body. Confusing, right? Ravage was said to have been an intuitive empath prior to switching bodies with Psylocke, but after switching bodies she gained telepathic abilities and could psionically generate a blade, a Psyblade that she could use to force her way into other telepathic characters' minds. So essentially she is Psylocke but not Psylocke and used to be an empath and is just a big jumble of continuity errors. Yeah, no bueno. Up next, number 4, Zorn. Zorn is a confusing character to begin with. Is he his own dude? Is he Magneto? Does that mean Magneto can do a bunch of other stuff like manipulate gravity and turn his sun head into a black hole? Lots of questions, friends. So, for starters, Zorn is a dude who first showed up in New X-Men Annual 2001 as a Chinese mutant who had a star for a brain. That's why he wears his little helmet. He ended up becoming the subject of an incredibly confusing retcon, in which he was revealed to be Magneto, who had actually died in the Planet X storyline prior. It made little sense. Then it was revealed in Excalibur Volume 3 Issue 1 that Magneto never died at all, which meant Zorn wasn't actually Magneto, and that led to a whole confusing storyline that featured Zorn's brother, who was kinda like his twin, and overall it was just a big mess. Now that could largely be the reason why so many fans find Zorn and his abilities perplexing. But even when Zorn was revealed not to be Magneto after all, his brother shared very similar powers to him, and was technically the second Zorn, and there were a bunch of major differences. Rather than having a sun in his head that his helmet covered, his brother had a black hole there. I mean, similar but very, very different things. The original Zorn also had healing powers, electricity and magnetism generation and manipulation, the ability to teleport via time-space wormholes, gravity manipulation, telepathy, and was self-sustaining. So yeah, that's a whole lot of powers to cram into one dude who may or may not be Magneto, but probably wasn't. Baffling. Moving on to number 3, Dazzler. Dazzler is often one of the most ripped on mutant characters in the comics, thanks to her publication origins. Initially, Dazzler, aka Alison Blair, was commissioned by Casablanca Records in 1978 as an animated special multimedia cross-promotion called The Disco Queen. Casablanca would bail on the project thanks to financial concerns, but the Disco Queen would live on, first appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 130 in 1980 as Dazzler. Dazzler's abilities, which are yet another source of her history of mockery, include the power to convert sound into light beams of various forms and intensity. She is also a trained singer, actress, and dancer, and of course is a highly accomplished roller skater. No joke on that last one. Arguably, the sound conversion trick of hers is the most confusing. She takes sonic vibrations which reach her body and transduces them into light. She has a large range of frequencies that she can do this with all kinds of sound pressures regardless of complexity, dissonance, or randomness being changed and converted, meaning a song and the sound of a car skidding could both be converted into light. So, what do these light beams do? This is where it gets even a little bit more baffling. She can temporarily blind people by creating a pulse of light of several thousand watts. She can create a cascade of sparkling lights that messes with people's equilibrium. She can create a strobe effect, which is no good for people who have epilepsy, and she can create rays of light that use patterns to produce trance-like effects in her victims. Dazzler can generate enough ultraviolet light to melt large metal objects. She can even use those light rays to create holograms and has used light energy to generate flight, which I don't quite understand, but that's okay. The more you know. And at number 2, Maggot. Maggot is a character that we've discussed a handful of times on our channel thanks to his absurd abilities. He has a slug-based digestive system. Oh, and he also is psychometric. Now, First appearing in Uncanny X-Men issue 345 from 1997, Maggot is a fellow whose digestive system is quite unique. Where his intestines should be, he has a hollow cavity that's home to a pair of semi-sentient slugs, or maggots, hence the name. He's named those slugs Eenie and Meanie. Eenie and Meanie can burrow themselves out of his torso, and at super fast speeds, they attack a foe or object with a powerful enzyme, which then processes and digests said object, or person. From there, they come back to Maggot, crawl back into his hollow cavity, and then transmit the food energy they collected to him, which then can supercharge him and allow him to do a variety of things like increase his strength, physical size, his sturdiness, stamina, etc. If the slugs don't re-enter his belly, this process does not work. And in the past, he's actually lost one of his slugs too. He doesn't get another one. He's left with one slug, which means I guess half of the abilities of digestive power with one slug. And finally, in at number 1, Darwin. Darwin is a peculiar character. First appearing in 2006, X-Men Deadly Genesis issue 2, he's a mutant who has reactive evolution powers. When he was first born, his mother practically disowned him because of his abilities, and later he was experimented on by scientists until Moira McTaggart recruited him. So what does reactive evolution mean in Darwin's case? Well, his body automatically adapted to his environment or circumstances, which allows him to survive anything, although the extent of that capability has never been fully defined in the comics. Now in the past, he's gained night vision in the dark, he's grown gills when in water, he became fireproof when his skin was exposed to an open flame. But it's not just basic physical transformations with him. He once converted his entire body into pure energy. He has increased his own intelligence. He morphed into a sponge when he was shot at with a weapon meant to destroy one's nervous system. He has learned different languages by merely looking at them. And when facing off against the Hulk, his body teleported him away from the battle. That last bit is interesting because Darwin doesn't have a choice over how his body reacts. While he may have chosen to increase his strength when fighting against the likes of the Hulk, his body sensed the best means of survival was to teleport him away from the battle. His body is even proven to process alcohol faster when drinking, preventing him from getting drunk. It's a tough life for Darwin. And at number 10, Elixir. Elixir, aka Josh Foley, first appeared in 2003 in New Mutants Volume 2, Issue 5. Funny enough, he was initially a member of an anti-mutant group called the Reavers, until his powers manifested and he's kicked out of the group, causing him to reluctantly join the Xavier Institute for Higher Learning after his parents also kick him out of his home. Speaking of his powers, Elixir is able to control the biological structure of any organic matter, which also includes his own body, as long as he is in proximity of his target. This means he can do things like heal others, restore and boost mutant powers, create painful and life-threatening ailments, like boils, welts, and even fatal tumors, cure the legacy virus, and even cause death. He can sense when people are sick or if there are any abnormalities in their body. He can also regenerate on a cellular level, and resurrect himself, meaning he is pretty much immortal. And at number 9, Vulcan. Initially introduced in 2006 in X-Men Deadly Genesis issue 1, Vulcan, aka Gabriel Summers, is the younger brother of Cyclops and Havoc. While he's known more so for being a supervillain, the character once upon a time was part of the X-Men team. Energy is Vulcan's jam. He can psionically manipulate, transform, control, and absorb vast amounts of energy, including energy on the electromagnetic spectrum and from exotic sources, such as Cyclops' optic blasts, or even magically created energy. He can even tap into and suppress mutant energies if he'd like, and can produce light, heat, force, you name it. This also allows him to fly and survive in space. And at number 8, Kid Omega, aka Quentin Quire. Quentin Quire first appeared in New X-Men issue 134 back in 2003, joining the Xavier Institute. He quickly became one of Xavier's most favored students, with the professor attempting to help him control his powers. But Quentin takes a bit of a turn for the worse when he decides to start up the Omega Gang, a group of teenage mutants whose goal it was to exact revenge for the death of a famous mutant fashion designer. That, and he is super depressed about a girl not liking him back and the fact that he was adopted. Dude has fragile self-esteem. Anywho, what can he do? Well, he has advanced precognitive and telepathic abilities that not only allow him to think at immense speeds, but to manipulate the minds of others, resist mind probes, and he can psychically influence a large group of people at one time. He's even created an entire universe in his mind that he calls the Construct that he can imprison people within. Minus his previous gang shenanigans, Quentin generally acts in the interest of good, having recently been featured a member of the Fresh Start iteration of the West Coast Avengers. In at 7, Maggot, aka Ileana Rasputina. Maggot is the younger sister of Colossus, and first debuted in Giant Size X-Men issue 1 back in 1975. Now despite that, her character was merely a background character for the most part, and it wasn't until 8 years later that she was given a proper name in the Uncanny X-Men issue 160 in 1982, after aging 7 years in the paranormal dimension of Limbo, where she gained her mutant ability. abilities. This includes interdimensional teleportation, magic manipulation, and the use of something called Soul Sword, which is something created by her own life force energy, a physical sword that with each use becomes more powerful. She can also manifest eldritch armor. During her time in Limbo, Magic became the sorceress supreme of that dimension, able to cast a plethora of spells using a mix of black magic and white magic, being taught the latter by an alternate universe version of Storm. She's also capable of creating powerful mind-blocking shields, keeping the likes of some of the strongest telepathic mutants out of her head, including Professor X. In at number 6, X-Man Nate Gray. Scott Summers and Jean Grey are responsible for some of the most powerful offspring in the mutant community, regardless of whether or not they actually intended to parent them. It's worth noting that Nate Gray is not Cable. Both characters are descendants of genetic material from Scott Summers and Jean Grey, but came to be in different manners, with Nate being grown in a laboratory in an alternate dimension thanks to Mr. Sinister, who used Scott and Jean's DNA to do so. Cable, on the other hand, is the son of Scott and Madeline Pryor, who is the clone of Jean Grey. Anywho, with that out of the way, let's talk about Nate. He has the ability to tap into the enormous psychic resources found in the astral plane, which allows him to manipulate matter and energy. His powers were diminished, though, by the Omega Machine. He's a character whose powers sometimes inflate and sometimes are taken away in the comics. He can also exist as living psychic energy, existing outside of his corporeal form. He was given his own solo series during Age of Apocalypse that briefly replaced Cable's series, and his series ended up running until 2001 as he was brought into the Earth 616 continuity, with it ending with his seemingly sacrificial death after struggling for years with being the most powerful person in a reality in which he did not belong. How tragic. Speaking of Scott and Jean's offspring, in at number 5, Rachel Summers. Rachel Summers was created by Chris Claremont and John Byrne, first appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 141 back in 1981. But she didn't become Rachel Summers until after her debut, thanks to retcons. Gotta love a retcon. From an alternate future, she's the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey, the sister of Nate Gray, and a half-sister of Cable's. And she's hella strong. Not only has she had the Phoenix Force's abilities, she's also an empath, telepathic, telekinetic, and can astral project. She has limited time manipulation abilities too, and her telekinesis abilities can remotely manipulate matter, including on a subatomic level. And at number 4, Legion, aka David Haller. Legion, also known as David Charles Haller, is the son of Professor Charles Xavier. He traveled 20 years into the past in order to kill Magneto before his father's nemesis had the chance to amass power. But before he could, he ended up killing his father instead, which caused the Age of Apocalypse timeline to occur. Legion is often depicted as an anti-hero, and is known for his severe dissociative identity disorder, which formed after his mutant powers manifested during a terrorist attack in which he ended up absorbing the mind of the terrorist leader into his own. Because of his trauma, parts of David's personality splinter, each controlling a different aspect of his powers. Speaking of powers, why is he so strong aside from his parentage? Well, he can reality warp, he can shapeshift, he can manipulate matter, and is capable of transmutation. He can manipulate energy, he's telepathic, telekinetic, he can teleport, and of course, he can time travel. But because of his severe dissociative identity disorder in later story arcs, he's often sedated or hospitalized. Reed Richards, Madison Jeffries, and Dr. Nemesis would later create something called a neutral switchboard wristband that would help him control his multiple personalities and better manage his powers. And in X-Men Legacy, he ended up erasing himself from existence altogether, but even that didn't fully work out for him. Poor Legion. And at number 3, Hope Summers. Hope Summers first appeared in X-Men issue 205 in 2007 as part of the X-Men Messiah Complex storyline. After Decimation, a story event in which Scarlet Witch used her powers to turn all of the mutants into regular depowered humans, Hope was the first mutant to be born, which starts a hunt for the character. She's saved by Cable, who names her after her adopted mother who looked after the child with him, and Summers technically being Cable's last name. Hope is a vessel of the Phoenix Force, and has unspecified limits when it comes to physically manipulating and mimicking the powers of other mutants. So yeah, in the scope of things, that could be super deadly later on down the line when mutant characters have been established in the MCU. Hope's mimicry abilities allow her to use those mutant powers at their utmost capacity, but because of this, she is potentially incredibly dangerous to people and the environment around her due to the massive amounts of power levels that she generates. Talk about a walking bomb. And at number 2, Jean Grey. Let's be honest here, Jean Grey is 100% going to be added to the MCU. It's almost inevitable. But the chances that we'll be seeing the Phoenix Force flexing its OP-ness on the big screen are pretty slim, at least for now. If anything, since the Phoenix Force is a major part of the X-Men stories, we think that if Jean does become the Phoenix, it'll be an event that's built up over time in the MCU, similar to what was done with the Infinity Gauntlet story arc. So really, Jean's Phoenix is just too strong for the MCU right now, but who knows what the future will hold. Regardless, she is OP as hell. And finally, at number 1, Franklin Richards. Franklin Richards is the son of Mr. Fantastic Reed Richards and Invisible Woman Sue Storm. And he's one incredibly powerful kid, that's for damn sure. First introduced in 1968 in Fantastic Four Annual Issue 6, Franklin is way beyond an Omega level mutant, having vast reality manipulating powers along with psionic powers. This means he can manipulate matter and energy on a cosmic scale, project energy, is capable of telekinesis, telepathy, astral projection, and precognition. He can teleport, and these two things are great. He's immortal and can create pocket universes. The kid can create his own damn universes. Celestials consider him to be on par with them, and his powers only increase the older he gets. So yeah, I'm sure we'd all love to see what Marvel Studios would do with a character like that. And to be fair, we're sure Franklin Richards is far from being up on the silver screen. The MCU still needs to establish his parents first. And some people have theorized that that won't happen until after Phase 5, so long way to go, friends. Long way to go.
In at number 10, Deadpool. Now, while it's still disputed as to whether or not Deadpool is an official member of the X-Men, but his involvement with Colossus and the fact that he's actually stayed at Xavier's school is enough for us to include him on this list. With a healing factor that would make Wolverine jealous, Deadpool puts his immortality to full use in not only the films but the comic books as well. Aside from the multiple suicide attempts, Deadpool has been the victim of decapitation and dismemberment several times. People such as Carnage, the Hulk, and even Wolverine have all done their best to separate the merc from his mouth. The story of how Deadpool gained his immortality is really interesting though. When Thanos discovers that Wade is in love with the literal personification of death, Thanos curses Deadpool with the inability to die, just so the two can't be together. Thanos was so jealous of Deadpool he accidentally made him immortal. In at number 9, Archangel. The story of Warren Worthington coming back is a little bit of a strange one, but regardless, it's an X-Men death and rebirth, just not the rebirth that we were expecting per se. In the storyline, when the Archangel personality takes over Warren and actually attempts to take over the role of Apocalypse, the rest of the X-Force gets pretty worried, and rightfully so, I should add. Anyone who wants to become Apocalypse should be watched closely, but a threat like that for the X-Force meant they needed to terminate Warren. And at the end of it all, it's Psylocke who delivers the execution by stabbing Warren with the life seed. Ultimately, this kills the Archangel, although not for long. As the team is retreating, they spot Warren trudging through the deep snow, except now he's been returned to his original form. However, it's not the same old Warren by a long stretch. This version was almost a blank slate. When he was stabbed with the life seed, it completely erased everything that Warren knew before his death. Later on, this more pure version of Warren is merged again with the Archangel clone, which may be seen as a technicality for some, but for us it's pretty much a resurrection of the original. In at number 8, Nightcrawler. Kurt Wagner's story of rebirth is really touching and speaks to the genuine character that Nightcrawler is. During the Second Coming storyline, Nightcrawler and Rogue were alone fighting against Bastion. Both of their intentions were to protect Hope Summers from the Super Sentinel, and as such they laid it all on the line. When Rogue went down, Kurt attempted to teleport her to safety, yet in the moment that he was about to do that, Bastion stuck his hand through Nightcrawler. So when they arrived on Utopia, he just had Bastion's hand sticking out of his chest and as a result slowly died from his injuries. But when Nightcrawler's soul rose to the heavens, he still continued his good deeds, helping them drive out evil whenever it reared its ugly head in the oasis of heaven. When Kurt's father chose to abuse their connection to attack heaven, Kurt took the opportunity to rematerialize his body back to Earth. But as a result, he had to turn over his own soul. Sure, he was able to return to the land of the living, but now he will never be able to return to heaven. In at number 7, Gambit. Gambit has always been one of my favorite X-Men characters, and therefore I was as happy as can be to mention that the Raging Cajun just won't stay down. In the 2012 17-issue Gambit Solo, the finale saw Gambit perfectly pulling off a prison riot which brought together not only his target, but the British intelligence MI13 and the Uncanny Avengers. As you can imagine, these groups coming together created quite the mess, and while his friends were picking up after him, the heroes actually lost track of the mob boss. The target ended up getting his hands on a gun and delivered a fatal shot to the head of Gambit. With Gambit now lying dead in the arms of Rogue, a member of the MI13 used the magic of Excalibur to reconstruct Gambit's blown apart head, which ended up bringing Gambit back to life and offered up a terrific line of dialogue where Gambit says, "Why do I feel like the day after Mardi Gras?" That's what Mardi Gras feels like. I don't want to go. In at number 6, Jubilee. Jubilee's death and rebirth stories are perhaps some of the coolest storylines out there. Her storylines have seen the hero die more often than the rest of the X-Men characters, but the first was perhaps the most unforgettable. After the House of M, Jubilee and many of the other X-Men had their powers basically turned off as they were captured by the Purifiers. Without their powers, they became easy targets for their enemies. The Purifiers beat them relentlessly and ended up crucifying them on the front lawn of the X-Mansion. Talk about a grudge. By the time that help arrived, they were all essentially dead. However, when Wolverine carried Jubilee to the sub-basement of the X-Mansion and gave her a blood transfusion from Angel, the restorative properties of the blood brought life back into her. In at number 5, Rogue. After the events of Avengers vs. X-Men, Rogue fully believed that the Scarlet Witch was going to cast another spell, so she decided to take care of it herself. To do this, she absorbed Wolverine's powers and ran through the Avenger with her new bone claws. Although what she didn't see coming was supervillain the Grim Reaper sneaking up behind her and stabbing Rogue in the back. Her death, while lasting for a few months, was eventually reversed when the Avengers went back in time to stop her first attack on the Scarlet Witch. Classic Avengers just turning back the clocks whenever they don't like when something plays out. Either way, it brought Rogue back into our lives, so I guess it's cool. In at number 4, Colossus. The story of Colossus dying and then coming back to life is every bit tragic as it is remarkable. When Peter's brother died, he felt it was his duty to find the cure for the legacy virus. Although the only way to make the cure airborne was to have the cure injected into a living person for whom it would ultimately kill. Colossus, though, decided this was a sacrifice that he needed to make and chose to inject himself with the cure. This is also the moment that Colossus went from looking human to altering his state into that steel form that we saw him as in the Deadpool films. Years after the run of Astonishing X-Men, a cure of the mutant disease was being developed, but all the X-Men knew was that it was being tested on an unknown subject. When the X-Men arrive to investigate, they soon find out that Colossus has been alive this whole time. He was being held against his will in an underground bunker, and a clone had been put in his place, which would be easy to do if you look like a robot. In at number 3, Cyclops. Scott Summers has actually died twice, but the first was more so the end of the life that he had known up until that point. Allow me to elaborate. During the 12 storyline, Cyclops had become a host for Apocalypse. Apocalypse at it again. And after being freed by the tyrant, Cyclops believed he was dead from the whole thing. But it was only that part of him that had died. Thankfully, Jean and Cable were able to remove Apocalypse from their friend to restore him back to his normal state. Well, as normal as can be. In the second death of Cyclops, we have to jump to Secret Wars 2. These strange mist clouds at the time were kind of floating around, and they were there to sterilize and ultimately kill the mutants all around the world. And one of its victims was Scott Summers. In a recent time travel storyline though, a younger version of his son Cable used a pinch of the Phoenix Force to turn the tides on Cyclops' fate. This ultimately resurrected his father and allowed him to crawl out of his grave. In at number 2, Jean Grey. The death of our beloved Jean Grey has been teased several times throughout the comic books. It gives us a heart attack every single time. But the real death came at the hands of a Magneto clone. A former X-Man himself actually poisoned Jean with a hefty dose of electromagnetism. Although because Jean had fully merged with the Phoenix Force, she was able to bring herself back several times. One of the more important cases of this re-manifestation was in the Avengers vs. X-Men storylines. Jean returns to save a power-hungry Cyclops from perishing and also finally makes her full return using the Phoenix Force. However, in the end, she decides to reject this cosmic force and live the rest of her life without it. Lastly, on our number 1 spot, Wolverine. As I mentioned before, Wolverine has some pretty crazy regenerative abilities, but when the miniseries titled Death of Wolverine was released, we all feared his abilities wouldn't be enough this time around. In the miniseries, Logan's healing properties were weakened by a virus, and word of his now diminished state spread rampant throughout the villain community and essentially put a big target on his hairy back. After discovering who was responsible for the virus, Wolverine was covered in this molten adamantium, and as the metal hardened, poor Logan ended up suffocating to death. Although other versions of him remained, this particular Wolverine was resurrected with the help of an Infinity Stone. In the hunt for Wolverine, a group of Reavers track down Logan's body, and what they find though is just the hardened shell of Logan with nothing inside. You see, the X-Men were able to extract his body from the statue using Kitty Pryde's phasing powers. His body was actually buried somewhere else, but we soon saw him alive and well holding the Space Stone for some reason. Little to no explanation as to how exactly he crawled out of the grave, but nonetheless, we're happy to see him again.
Number 10, Bloodstorm. Now, Storm is already mistress of the elements, so quite powerful and quite interesting. But what happens when she becomes a vampire? Now, this has happened briefly in main continuity, but in the Mutant X universe, it became a permanent change. The Mutant X comic series was published from 1998 to 2001, and as mentioned, it saw a very different Storm. This was after she was bitten by Dracula. Here, she was not saved, but instead became a full-fledged creature of the night. She, of course, had vows not to kill, so she had the vampire dilemma, which she solved by hiring some of her former teammates to let her drink from them, like Kitty Pryde. She would eventually leave the X-Men and join a team called the Six. She also turns Gambit into a vampire, even though she warns him he'll regret it, and he does. Spoilers. Listen when people warn you. Bloodstorm became a breakout character of this series. Number 9, New Sun Gambit. Speaking of Gambit, let's take a look at one of his alternate versions. This is New Sun Gambit, and he hails from Earth 9921. Gambit actually has enormous power potential that was quashed by Mr. Sinister in the main continuity, but that continuity is not all. In this other universe, he was trained to use his abilities even before he had them, and then when this was combined with his full potential and a mystic ceremony, he became something else altogether. The only thing is, the awakening of all these abilities would create a shockwave that would destroy his Earth, forcing him to travel around, and of course he ended up on the 616 Earth, where he ended up befriending Gambit and trying to help him along his way, but didn't tell him who he was. It was after his reveal and Gambit's subsequent disgust that he changed his name to New Sun. Some fans like seeing the full unleashed potential on display of Gambit. Number 8, Basilisk. Not all alternate versions that people like have happy outcomes. Case in point, Basilisk from Earth 11326, an Earth also known as Age of X. Here, Cyclops was incarcerated in a mutants-only facility after the manifestation of his powers as a teenager killed several people, including his parents. He captured the attention of the prison warden Archangel because of his power set, so he made him this very special mask. It looks a lot like the skull mask from Persona 5, and it's something that people like about this character. In fact, for many, it's what makes him cooler. It is a very menacing-looking mask. Now, a lot of this universe had to do with Legion, one of its personalities, and manifesting another world. So for some, it was just a cool concept in general. The mask looked great. Love the mask. Number 7, Soldier Supreme. Here we have an amalgamated character from Warp World. This was the universe that was created when Gamora had the Infinity Gauntlet, put everybody's souls into the Soul Gem, and then folded that universe in half. As a result of this, the characters were merged and fused together. So you have Marvel characters smushed, and one of those was Captain America, Steve Rogers, and Doctor Strange, Stephen Strange. So I mean, they kind of already had the same name, just spelled differently, so it made it a bit easier. Back there, Dr. Stephen Rogers, but now with a PH. Their stories actually don't fuse too badly. It's World War II, and Stephen Rogers is contracted for a super secret soldier experiment, only it turns out it's a cover for a mystical ceremony instead of for, you know, the scientific one that he actually undergoes. But these mystic rituals still end up enhancing his strength and allowing him to connect with the occult, and he becomes Soldier Supreme. So he has Cap's cowl, but he still has like a mustache. And he was actually one of the heroes who objected to Warp World being completely destroyed at the end of the arc by Adam Warlock. So Warlock found a way to let it still exist and let these characters still exist. It was one of those loopholes. Stephen Rogers did that and kept being a hero. Number 6, Old Man Logan. Would any of our nerd lists be complete without mentioning Old Man Logan? Yes, they would, but it just keeps coming up. It's a staple here on Top 10 Nerd. Well, this story is one of the most popular alternate universe stories out there, and it has a famously gross confrontation between the Hulk and Wolverine, or Logan, because he's not Wolverine anymore in this story. Here we have a grizzled old man Logan fighting his way across a supervillain-controlled America, trying to keep his claws sheathed after what he did, which, spoilers, was somehow managing to kill most of the X-Men. This was because he fell for an illusion created by Mysterio. This is a must-read for many fans and a fave Wolverine story for others. Number 5, Ex-Apes. The X-Men are monkeys, or rather apes. This, funnily enough, spawned off of the Marvel Zombies universe and event. Basically, they're trying anything. That event was just so popular. This did not turn out to be quite the hit that was, but I mean, few things can. But this universe still has its fans. Actually, everybody in this universe are apes or monkeys or animals of some kind. So really, if you enjoy this concept, it's just the whole universe, and you have people like the Ape Avengers and Dr. Octopus. It's made for a certain type of pun-loving individual. It's a bit niche, but for some it sparks joy. Number 4, which breed? For this we have to go for Neil Gaiman of Sandman fame's 1602 Marvel Comics contribution. It is also an alternate universe story. In this universe, the Marvel universe is all happening by in Elizabethan times, 1602. Their mutants exist, but they are known as witch breed. This is because they are thought to be the spawn of demons or witches. Or both. They are creatures to be hunted down, but they find safe haven in Xavier's select college for sons of gentlefolk, a school that causes great concern for Sir Nicholas Fury because he sees the potential of all these students as soldiers, which, let's not lie, that's part of what Xavier is doing. Again, this is a universe where people tend to like the whole thing, but the X-Men stand out as a distinct part, or rather, the witch breed. Number 3, X-Babies. Versions of your favorite characters as babies or kids. This is a concept that is either really fun or incredibly lame, depending upon who you're talking to. So the X-Babies are clones created by Mojo in the Mojoverse. This was probably inspired by an even earlier story where he had just taken the X-Men and turned them into kids, again for entertainment. Because you know, if anything goes on long enough, be it show, series, whatever, you're gonna get two things. You're gonna get a child episode and you're gonna get a musical episode. Now the X-Babies are a concept that is short-lived, but they are usually returned to. There is even an A-Babies versus X-Babies. Again, how cool you'll find these tots depends upon your tolerance for baby-related shenanigans. Number 2, Earth X. The version of the X-Men here are depressing, but all of Earth X is depressing actually. After an experiment of Reed Richards goes wrong, or seemingly that's what happened, for once it's not Reed's fault, I know, shock and awe, a population of superpowered beings is produced all over the Earth, and the world drastically alters. To quote The Incredibles, when everyone's super, no one is. Suddenly there's not as much of a reason to hate and fear the X-Men, and they've largely fallen apart. The one character people tend to remember the most that sticks out when they first think of this is Wolverine, who's got a beer gut and is married to Jean Grey, except it's not Jean, it's Madeline Pryor, but he keeps calling her Jean, and it's just sad. Now how exactly is this cooler, you may be asking? Well, it's all in the depiction. It's unique, it's memorable, and part of a well-received work. So for many, that's what makes it cool. And finally, in at number 1, Vampire Wolverine. Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. If you thought people loved Vampire Storm, then you know that they enjoy Vampire Wolverine. Wolverine has been a vampire more than once. You have what-if stories like the aforementioned Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. But you also have arcs like Curse of the Mutants, which would also be the arc that left Jubilee as a vampire for a bit. Many have fond memories of the What If story, where upon successfully turning Storm, Dracula then turns all the rest of the X-Men. Only because of Wolverine's healing factor, he figures out how to use his powers way faster than everybody else, and so he dethrones Dracula and takes over as leader of the vampires. In fact, he leads the new vampire X-Men to take over New York. It's up to the bizarre combination of Doctor Strange and the Punisher to take him down.
Number 10, Noir. In Marvel's Noirverse of Earth 90214, the X-Men are actually troubled youth and delinquents who are brought together by Charles Xavier, a controversial psychiatrist who believed that sociopathy was the next state of human evolution. Instead of attempting to redeem the youth whom he took into his school, the Xavier School for Exceptionally Wayward Youth, he worked to train them even further in their criminal arts. While some of them were exceptionally dangerous, at the end of the day, this version of the X-Men were just young criminals who were humans. So, yeah. But they did have guns, so there is that. Number 9, 1602. The X-Men of Earth 311 are surprisingly powerful for the time period in which they live, 1602. In this reality, mutants are instead called Witchbreed, and the team of X-Men are an Elizabethan reflection of the Earth 616 original team. Carlos Xavier is their teacher and head, while Scotius Summerisle is their leader and is joined by the ice-wielding Robert Trefusis, a beast like Henry McCoy, and the powerful telekinetic and telepath disguised as a boy, Jean Grey. Together, this team managed to help save their reality when a rift was caused due to all these heroes basically coming into existence so early, destabilizing it. In the end, Jean died from overuse of her powers, making her weaker than her 616 counterpart, but overall, the team is still pretty strong, especially for this time period, like I said. And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it, I don't know if there's 10 more alternate versions of the X-Men, but we can definitely do something in this realm. Be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. And also go check out our Top 10 Nerd Elite, our new channel, and make sure you subscribe to that where we're gonna have lots of bonus content for you. Number 8. Earth Z. The X-Men were some of the last heroes standing up against the zombie horde on Earth 2149, or Earth Z. While Professor X was quickly devoured, Magneto stepped in to become the leader and encouraged the X-Men to fight to kill their opponents, as opposed to just, trying to hold them off. Otherwise, he warned the heroes would easily be overcome. Gone were the days of fighting to incapacitate their enemies. Wolverine himself seemed very much on board with this, and when Nick Fury called a meeting of the surviving heroes to explain the situation on the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, many of the X-Men could be spotted amongst their numbers. Surviving in Marvel Zombies even just for that initial wave is pretty impressive, considering how many iconic and powerful heroes didn't make it. In fact, when they're with Nick Fury, I'm pretty sure I counted 9 of them, which I think is pretty impressive. Number 7. Days of Future Past. The X-Men team from Earth 811 didn't do too hot, and ultimately ended up trapped in a post-apocalyptic situation where the world was ending and Sentinels were killing just about everything. Although they ultimately failed in their attempt to travel to the past to fix it to save the future, with Rachel Summers transporting Kitty Pryde back in time to the body of her younger self, Kitty still found a way to save the day when she returned as Widget, and with help from an alternate Excalibur team and alternate Rachel Summers, deprogrammed the Sentinels, turning them into Protectrons of a sort who would work to defend the mutants instead of destroy them. Basically, I feel like Days of Future Past is just powerful because of Kitty, but that's just my opinion. Anyways, Kitty's pretty powerful, Kitty and Rachel, so that's all we really need. Number 6. Ultimate, or Ultimates, if you will. Earth 1610. In the ultimate reality, the X-Men were born out of a break between Professor Charles Xavier and Magneto's Eric Lehnsherr. Here, the two were friends and like-minded individuals for a time who together founded the Brotherhood of Mutants. They lived together with their students in peace and harmony on the Savage Land, until a falling out drove them apart, due to Magneto believing in ruling humankind and Xavier disagreeing with that. Magneto was the one responsible for Professor X losing his ability to walk and ending up in a wheelchair, and Professor X ended up creating his own mutant group called the X-Men. Later, during the X-Men's fight against Magneto during Ultimatum, many members of the team died, but a few of the most powerful did manage to survive. The team members that survived included Jean Grey, Kitty Pryde, Colossus, Rogue, Iceman, and Storm. And I think that was pretty much it, actually. Ugh. Number 5. The Brotherhood of Evil X-Men from the Future. So this team isn't really a straight up alternate X-Men team, as the name implies. I'm cheating just a little bit here. However, they did pose as the true future X-Men when they showed up in Battle of the Atom, and I really like them, so I'm just gonna count them, cause I do the lists, so I get to decide what folks we include. Cool? Cool. This team also has some of my favorite overall members, with Charles Xavier II appearing as the leader, and also boasting of a roster including and formerly including Zorn, Jean Grey, an Ice Hulk version of Bobby Drake, an insane version of Beast, Raze, Deadpool, and a much more powerful Molly Hayes, who doesn't succumb to exhaustion after using her super strength. Which is pretty scary, because Molly Hayes is pretty strong. Number 4. The Dark X-Men. The Dark X-Men is Norman Osborn's team of mutants who were brought together in response to unrest in the mutant community during the events of Dark Reign. Honestly, I feel like between number 5 on this list and number 4, it really could have gone either way, so let me know if you feel like, the future fake X-Men should have gone above, because I was very on the fence about this. Initially, Norman Osborn was not allowed to get involved with the mutants, but after riots broke out, he was able to finally make his own X-Men team, which he declared to the public was the real X-Men team, declaring the real X-Men team Outlaws. Fortunately, it turned out both the team leader Emma Frost and Namor the Submariner, who, when pitted against the true X-Men, turned on their own dark X-Men teammates. I didn't even talk about the other people on this roster, but there were lots of cool people. Number 3. Extreme X-Men. Extreme X-Men Volume 2 is an X-Men series and a team that takes a page out of the Exiles book, not to be confused with Chris Claremont's Extreme X-Men roster led by Storm in Volume 1 of that series. This version, written by Greg Pak, is a multiversal team of heroes who hail from various alternate realities. Seriously, I love this series. It's 1, really pretty, and 2, it's just really cool. The team is typically led by the main continuity Dazzler, Allison Blair. The team roster included such amazing members as Sage, Earth 12025 Hercules, boyfriend of the James Howlett of that reality, the James Howlett from Earth 12025 himself, Emmeline Frost Summers, an OP godlike immortal version of Emma Frost who is married to Scott in her reality of Earth 52012, Corporal Scott Summers from the American Civil War based reality of Earth 70213, a younger version of Kurt nicknamed Kid Nightcrawler, and a floating Xavier head. So many great people. Number 2. Age of Apocalypse. I would say the Age of Apocalypse version of the X-Men has to be one of the toughest versions out there, which shouldn't come as a surprise as, like eventually happened on Earth Z, Magneto also kinda ended up becoming their leader after the death of Xavier. Although in the Age of Apocalypse reality of Earth 295, many things are different. Rogue and Magneto end up getting kinda married, with another kind of odd relationship developing between Storm and Quicksilver that also kinda makes sense given this reality, and Cyclops ends up working for Apocalypse, who rules the world. Another major difference is that in this reality, Charles was actually killed before he could ever form the X-Men, meaning that Magneto was their one true leader here. Number 1. Future X-Men. Personally, I think the future X-Men that we meet in Battle of the Atom, the real future X-Men of Earth 13729 that is, are pretty nuts. I mean, they have Widget on their team. Widget! And they also have a wizard version of Iceman who goes by the name Ice Wizard now, and Wiccan as one of their members as well. I don't know about you, but it doesn't really sound like it gets better than that. Jubilee also takes up the mantle of Wolverine in this reality, which is adorable, and Logan goes on to become the new professor, being known as Professor Logan, which I love. Number 10. Bishop. Bishop's powers are based in energy manipulation, as so many other heroes from his time period were. And no, I don't mean the future, I mean the time in which he was created in the comics. The 90s. What a time. Still, Lucas Bishop is one of the few heroes who withstood the test of time and is currently a main character in the comics today, appearing as part of the Marauders team and as Red Queen Kitty Pryde's Red Bishop within the Hellfire Trading Company. I'm so happy that Bishop got to be a bishop. It's too perfect. It's so perfect. Bishop is considered an alpha level mutant and is often known for brandishing his future XSE guns, which he can recharge with any energy he has absorbed and stored. Pretty useful. We're talking near unlimited ammo, as long as he has some kind of energy coming his way. Number 9. Wolverine, aka Laura Kinney, formerly known as X-23. Laura has since taken up the mantle of Wolverine after her genetic father Logan. She too is now known as Wolverine, so we get to have 2 of them on the island of Krakoa. Yay! Just like that, they gave Laura that title, but didn't feel like they had to take it away from her after Logan himself was using it again in his own self-titled series. It feels very respectful to let her keep it. Also, Laura definitely deserves our respect as she is not only extremely durable like Logan, possessing her own healing factor, but is also an immensely skilled and deadly fighter, who you would likely not want to mess with, being trained since birth. Wolverine is currently part of the newest X-Men roster, featured in the 2021 book, but has also been an ally and member here and there throughout the years. And before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, be sure to show up by clicking that like, and we've got a little announcement for you. We have a new channel coming your way. What? It is called Top 10 Nerd Elite, and if you want all that good bonus content, you need to go over there and you need to subscribe. Number 8. Sync. Everett Thomas just recently saw an amazing power boost in the comics. So amazing in fact that it actually took me forever to collect the issue in which it was featured, issue 18 of the previous X-Men run from 2019. Don't worry though, I finally tracked it down, so my collection as such is complete. Perfect. And honestly, I get why it was such a highly coveted issue. It also features Sync's rainbow aura that shines through when he is using his ability and syncing up with other mutants. Up until recently, Sync's powers gave him the ability to temporarily take on the powers of mutants near him, syncing up with them. But as of issue 18, he can now sync up with any superhuman being. And it's also been implied before that with more experience, he could take on the powers of others for longer and perhaps even permanently. Number 7. Wolverine. He's the best there is at what he does, bub. So of course Logan has to make our cut. Wolverine is one of the most popular mutants and X-Men members out there the world over, which gives him a pretty big boost when it comes to what he's capable of. Wolverine might not be Omega or even Alpha level, but he never backs down from a fight, and is not to be underestimated, as he's probably one of the most determined and often noble heroes around. Sure, you might be able to beat him initially, but due to his insane healing factor, X-Factor, Wolverine will often just get back up and keep coming back for more. He's also a super skilled fighter. On more than one occasion, he's taken a bullet to the head and after a few moments managed to recover and get right back up. In alternate realities, we've also seen Wolverine bombarded with energy blasts until he was nothing more than a skeleton, and he still managed to come back from that. Wolverine is tough as nails, but with a heart of gold, which is what makes him such a great X-Men member and just an overall great character. Number 6. Polaris. Polaris is the daughter of Magneto, and with that comes a lot of power and honestly probably a lot of pressure as well. Still, Lorna handles the pressure fairly well and all the other stuff that comes with being Magneto's daughter, like her mind being manipulated when she was a child. Okay, so maybe she didn't handle that whole reveal so great, but she definitely shows just how resilient she can be whenever she has to deal with some of the more challenging parts of being Magneto's heir. Polaris' powers are similar to her father's, allowing her to manipulate magnetic fields, and she is considered an alpha level mutant. More recently in the comics, while using her abilities and with the help of Krakoa, she built the X-Factor's new headquarters on the Mutant Island nation all in one night. Pretty impressive stuff. Number 5. Juggernaut. Juggernaut is one of the most powerful characters out there in the comics, and while he might not be a mutant and is known for being in fact a longtime X-Men villain, neither of these things stopped him from eventually joining the team. This was all around the time that Juggy had lost most of his powers, with Kane having a falling out with Cyttorak and ultimately deciding to patch things up with his stepbrother Charles Xavier. He joined the X-Men and during his time there surprisingly made a good number of friends, including the mutant known as Squid Boy. Poor Squid Boy. R.I.P. Who would attempt to blow the whistle when he found Kane in a meeting with the Brotherhood. Kane actually was operating as a mole, hoping to play along long enough to learn of the Brotherhood of Mutants' plans and warn the X-Men of them. Such a tragic story! Number 4. Magneto. Magneto obviously has to make our cut. Despite being a powerful X-Men villain, like Juggernaut, he too has been an ally to the team and even at one point was a member. Magneto had a few instances where he worked alongside the X-Men and even at one point saved them from imprisonment. He eventually attempted to join up with them but was initially denied membership by Professor X. Later, however, Magneto would ally himself with the team during their time together on Battleworld and eventually would end up joining the team and acting as a leader of sorts after Professor X was injured. During his time on the team, Magneto would also become the teacher of the New Mutants, which I love. Number 3. Storm. Storm is of course one of the most powerful mutants out there, and definitely one of the most powerful X-Men members. Not just for her amazing powers either, but also for her skills as a leader and a fighter. Recently during the pre-Hellfire Gala issue of Marauders, in honor of their valuable teammate Storm, the Marauders came together to share their favorite Storm stories and moments. We also learned just how dangerous Storm can be even without her powers, and as awesome as she is with them, I think some of my favorite Storm moments recently have actually involved her fighting hand to hand, or with her famous and perhaps endless supply of knives. We still don't really know for sure how many knives Storm has on her at all times. At the very least, we know it's 8 though. And if you want to check out that very heavy Storm issue of Marauders, you can check it out in issue 20. Number 2. Marvel Girl. Marvel Girl is one of the greatest and most powerful X-Men members out there, and really no powerful X-Men members list can be complete without her. Sadly, sort of, as I did want Storm to take my number 1 spot on this list honestly. I was really like, I really want to make Storm number 1. Jean Grey has done a lot of good and a lot of bad, but whatever side she happens to be on as Marvel Girl, Phoenix, or Dark Phoenix, the fact remains that she's always pretty unstoppable. Unless, of course, she wants to be stopped. Even back when she was originally introduced in the comics, back in issue number 1 of the Uncanny X-Men, she stood out, at least to me, as having the most potential in terms of her powers and power levels. Of course, then she'd later succumb to a bit of Princess Peach syndrome, as she would constantly be the member of the team who'd get kidnapped or in some cases be rendered useless because of the limits of how much she could mentally lift being tied to how much she could physically lift, which I don't know, doesn't seem like it should be a thing, but it was a thing at the time. Though later on her limitations could probably be explained away by the mental blocks Xavier had placed in Jean's mind to protect her and others from her insane raw power, which we'd learn about later, of course. And friends, if you also love Jean Grey as much as we love Jean Grey, we also have a really awesome Jean Grey alternates list, so if you want to learn about more powerful versions of her, you should go check that out. It's a good time. Number 1. Tempest. Just because it's hard for me to always succumb to Jean being number 1. Even though I know she deserves it, I know she's number 1, we have Tempest at her number 1 spot today. Because Tempest could literally undo anyone, just like that, like she did with Matthew Malloy, who is set up to be pretty much the most powerful mutant in all of existence, I'd say. His reality manipulation was off the charts, and yet Tempest was able to defeat him by traveling back in time to make sure his parents just never met. Her ability allows her to create time bubbles in which she can control the flow of time. She can slow or speed up time as much as she wants within the bubbles, and can also use her chronokinesis powers to time travel. Time travel initially for Tempest was a little tricky, as her emotions have been shown to affect her abilities, but she has also spent years working to hone them. So at this point in time, she's definitely someone you wouldn't want to piss off. Otherwise, you might go to bed one night and then never wake up again, because Tempest decided to erase you from existence.
Coming in number 10, Deadpool. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. What a ride. This issue was released August 2012, and just the front cover is bloody goodness. What happened here was the X-Men put Wade into the Ravencroft Asylum in attempts to heal his insanity. The doctor just happened to be Psycho Man, of course, so he brainwashed Wade with plans to shut down all of his inner voices, which worked, but now these voices were replaced with voices that were encouraging him to, well, kill everybody in the Marvel Universe. Reed then gets left all rubbery and lifeless, and it's pretty dark overall. As far as X-Men villains go, this version of Wade was made a tad more intimidating than X-Men Origins Wolverine, just a tad. Coming number 9, Storm. Aurora Monroe made her debut in Giant Size X-Men issue number 1. She's one of the more popular members of the X-Men, being portrayed by Halle Berry and Alexander Shipp. She was recruited by Charles and joined the team to save other original students from Krakoa. She was appointed leader after several years of work. In X-Men Apocalypse, we see her recruited as a horseman, but by the end of the movie she betrays him and joins the X-Men. But as far as powerful X-Men villains, I can't not look for a reason to include Storm. She's Omega, and when she's on the wrong side of the fight, it can get messy. Coming number 8, Wolverine. Wolverine has a rough past, so it's no surprise that he's gone down a few dark paths as well. In the movie Logan, for example, we see two Wolverines battle it out, and it's stressful, it's gory, and it's very upsetting the most. But I mean, that's Wolverines going at it, so it sounds about right. In the Age of Apocalypse storyline, Logan goes from being an X-Men to the Horseman of Death. Yeah, Apocalypse actually had Wolverine go against Sabretooth in order to see who would become the new Horseman. Wolverine came out on top, and Apocalypse restored the adamantium to his skeleton. Quite the deal if you ask me. To make matters worse, Apocalypse replaced Wolverine with a Skrull so the X-Men wouldn't even notice. So there's a few comics here that could blend nicely into the MCU, like Apocalypse replacing Wolverine with a Skrull. That is totally possible. With Ryan Reynolds confirming the next Deadpool would have included Logan, I doubt there isn't some sort of that coming with him for Deadpool 3. They're basically best friends in real life. Adam Sandler has like 14 of his friends every movie, so I'm holding out hope for Logan. Coming in number 7, Juggernaut. K Marco made his first comic book appearance in X-Men issue 12. When Kane and Charles Xavier were serving together in the same unit, but when Kane was under fire, he ran off to take cover in a nearby cave. The cave was actually home to the lost temple of Cyttorak, so Kane grabbed this glowing ruby from the lap of an idol, read the inscription, and possessed the power of the Crimson Bands of Cyttorak, becoming a literal human Juggernaut. After he dug himself out, he destroyed an entire village, with the previous man who held the Juggernaut mantle, Jin Taiko, getting taken out as well. We've literally seen him rip Deadpool in half, and if he's coming over to the MCU, I hope Juggernaut will as well. Coming in number 6, Strife. Making his debut in New Mutants issue number 87, Strife was the clone of Nathan Summers, the son of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor. He's a clone of Cable from the future. He has this high-tech armor, he's a telepathic and telekinetic mutant, and unlike Cable, who has to devote his psionic powers to ensure this techno-organic virus doesn't get his right side as well, Strife doesn't need to worry about that issue. Apocalypse wanted this child, he wanted to raise the clone himself, so down the road he could one day claim the body as his own. Coming number 5, Shadow King. Making his first appearance in X-Men 117, the Shadow King is a multiversal manifestation of the dark side of the human consciousness, spawned by the first Nightmare. Amal Farouk was the leader of the underground syndicate located in the Thieves' Quarter of Cairo, Egypt. He's a powerful mutant who also happened to be a vessel for said Shadow King. Farouk was able to control everybody around him, and it's pretty terrifying when you think about it. He feeds on the shadows of your soul, so yeah, with Marvel now veering off to the cosmic side of things, we could see a Shadow King whenever the X-Men come into the picture. In the comics before World War II, Amal Farouk worked with Baron von Strucker to try and destabilize Britain's political structure. Even more terrifying. Coming in number 4, Mr. Sinister. Dr. Nathaniel Essex made his first debut in Uncanny X-Men 221. He's not that easy to forget though once you take a look at him. He's kind of terrifying, well, to say the least. He's obsessed with experimenting on mutants, and yes, that includes himself. He was obsessed with Darwin's theory of evolution, but felt like they were shackled by too many moral constraints. He couldn't even get funding from the Hellfire Club, so he had to get together a group that he named the Marauders, and got them to kidnap people off of the streets of London so that he could continue his experiments. Guy is pretty twisted when you think about it. He even tried to experiment on his own son, who just happened to be no longer alive. A villain who resurrects the dead? I mean, the MCU could probably use that right about now. Coming number 3, Mojo. Making his first debut in Longshot issue number 3, Mojo is known for using Earth as forms of TV entertainment for the universe. We're getting close to these cosmic vibes with Loki's show on Disney+, so I don't think a live-action Mojo is far-fetched. The more viewers he gets for his interdimensional TV show, the more powerful that he becomes. So in 1992, the issue titled Mojo's Media Madness had this wild storyline where Mojo gets Rogue, Cyclops, Beast, and Wolverine to think that they are characters from The Wizard of Oz. I would sell my soul to see this show. I mean, but for now, the comic will have to do. This takes place in X-Men issue number 10. Mojo is a unique villain. He's part of a race of spineless beings from a planet named after him called Mojo World, inside a pocket dimension called the Mojoverse. So this race of spineless beings were slowly going crazy over time because TV signals from another space-time continuum were scattered into their timelines. He's a powerful sorcerer, and we're not exactly sure just how far his magic can go, and I don't really want to find out, to be honest. Coming number 2, Onslaught. Making his first debut in X-Men issue number 15, Onslaught was a sentient psionic entity created from the minds of Charles Xavier and Magneto. That's pretty messed up. So when the X-Men were fighting the Acolytes, Wolverine hit Magneto, and then in return Magneto ripped the adamantium from his bones, which, gotta say, I thought hangnails were bad. This sounds like an absolute nightmare. His healing factor had to work overtime for sure. Xavier shut down Magneto's mind, which made him catatonic, but during this moment all of Magneto's lust for hate and violence leaked into Charles' consciousness, creating this new personality called Onslaught. He now obtained the ability to tap into the psychic resources of the astral plane, where he could then manipulate matter and energy. There's also a red Onslaught, but I'll save that for another time. Last but certainly not least, our number 1 spot, Apocalypse. Ensabat Nur, making his first steps in Marvel graphic novel issue number 17, was born nearly 5,000 years ago at the edge of the Valley of the Kings in ancient Egypt. He was abandoned by his tribe because of the fact that he looked, well, different. He had the Avatar look going on, for lack of a better explanation. He later was raised by the nomads with the idea that only the strong survive, a tough way for a child to think and live. He actually was killed by agents of Ozymandias, but was later revived thanks to his mutant abilities. For example, his self-molecular manipulation allows for him to alter his physical form, and he's also a genius. Even before being modified by the celestial ship, Apocalypse was already living for thousands of years. All he has to do is enter a deep sleep. In the X-Men Apocalypse storyline, we see just how big and bad the guy can get though.
Kicking off the list at number 10, M. Monet St. Croix made her first appearance in Generation X issue 1 as Penance, and by the time issue 40 rolled around, she was introduced as Monet. She was the second child of Ambassador Cartier St. Croix, who was a wealthy former president of numerous corporations. Now, although she had an older brother and 2 young twin sisters, her father still favored her. Now, her brother Marius had mutant abilities, and when they manifested, he became evil. Sadly, he actually took out his mother and was kicked out of the family, and then he asked Monet to join him, traveling through other dimensions, gaining power. She was like, nope, I'm good, thanks. So she rejected him, and Marius trapped her in this form of a mute creature with diamond-hard red skin. And he fed on her powers. What a not nice guy. It's awful. So Claudia and Nicole, her sisters, the twins, they joined forces. Like, literally. They merged into a new version of Monet. And it was all pretty much the same. Personality, appearance, and powers. M is a telepathic genius, and of course super strength and super speed sure does help her get the job done. Before we continue on with this list, guys, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up, that would be great. It does help our channel quite a bit. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Let's go right back into this list. I don't want to waste any more time. Number 9, Frenzy. Okay, Joanna Cargill. She made her first debut in X Factor issue 4. Now, she accidentally punched her father so hard that her hand went through his chestal plate, which is just a great way to find out you have powers. Now, her father was in no means a good person at all, but still, finding out you're a mutant in that way is pretty rough. That's pretty traumatizing for a young kid. So she became known as Frenzy, and she joined the Allegiance of Evil. Now, after the Acolytes disbanded, Joanna became ambassador for Genosha and stood by Magneto until she was captured by the US government in order to learn more about Magneto, but she didn't talk. She was a tough one. She didn't talk until Jean Grey entered and freed her, giving her the option to join the X-Men the easy way or the hard way. Jean used the hard way, and then Frenzy's entire attitude was changed. Her personality was like campy, it was awkward, not nearly as confident as before, but her powers were still there. She did help the X-Men find Magneto's base. She was a team member, even if it was forced and campy. So after Magneto's defeat, her mind control was released and she rejoined the Acolytes and then left the X-Mansion. Super speed, super strength, super stamina, super everything, you name it, she's got it. Her body has been described as being hard as steel, making the She-Hulk put up quite a fight. Number 8, armor. Hisako Ichiki made her first appearance in Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, Issue 4. Now, she grew up in Japan before joining the Xavier Institute. She formed a close relationship with Wing and Blindfold once she joined Kitty Pryde's Paladin Squad. Now, her new close friends were being attacked one day by Ord of Breakworld, so Armor used her unique mutant abilities to take care of him with a mighty punch. She can create the psionic exoskeleton suit of armor, hence the name Armor. It's fueled by the energy of Hisako's ancestors. In the Ultimate Universe, her abilities create quite the spectacle as well. They appear in the shape of these massive animals, these great beasts, even dragons at some point. As if these abilities weren't surprising and fantastic enough, she also received combat training from Wolverine and tactic training from Cyclops. So she's kind of a big deal. Number 7, Vulcan. He named himself after the Roman god of fire, but Vulcan's real identity was that of Gabriel Summers. He was born after Cyclops and Havoc. Well, not really. He wasn't really born. He was actually surgically removed from his mother's body and placed in an incubator accelerator, then aged to be at his prime, and then sent to Earth to work for Dak and Shikari. One of those normal childhoods, you know? So he escaped and he was found by Moira McTaggart with no memories of who he is or where he came from. Poor kid. So we asked for Charles' help, and then all Kid Vulcan wanted to do was learn about his mutant abilities. Sounds like the perfect student. Like, come on, you're doing all the right things. Charles needed help from him and other newcomers to find the remaining X-Men. So Charles put him in this danger room as a training exercise to get them sharp in a short amount of real time. So it felt like months of training, but in fact it's only a few hours. And then Vulcan and this new team were sent to Krakoa to rescue the original X-Men. But Vulcan revealed to Scott that Xavier sacrificed his own brother to save him. Number 6, Maggot. That's a fun name right off the bat. Maggot? Maggot, or I mean Japheth, first appeared in Uncanny X-Men issue 345. He was born with 5 siblings but never grew at the same rate as them. And on top of that, he had struggled with pains in his stomach. Sadly, those pains turned out to maybe be cancer, and he feared that he would run his family dry with medical bills. So at just age 12, he left the South African village and started to think of a dark solution to his problem. Super tragic. So he ended up in the Kalahari Desert and was found by Magneto, who figured out that these stomach issues were actually these 2 slug-like creatures that lived in the boy's body, and they acted as his digestive system. Years later, Maggot reached out to Magneto in hopes that he would help him with this gross situation. Now the slugs, named Eenie and Meanie, because that's what you do when you have slugs, you give them cute nicknames, they were these sentient techno-organic slugs that could devour anything. Doesn't matter what kind of matter you are, gone, devoured. They would do it fast too, not at the pace of normal slugs. And once lunchtime was finished, they would return back to Japheth's stomach, transferring the energy from what they just consumed, granting him super strength and durability. Also, he had a nice avatar tan to go along with these magnificent abilities. Number 5, Kid Omega. Now again, the word kid is used lightly in this list. You do not want to underestimate Quentin Quire, aka Kid Omega. He made his first appearance in X-Men issue 134. He's been described as one of the most powerful telepaths next to Jean Grey. So off the bat, you know you're in for a treat. He was one of Xavier's prized pupils. That is until, of course, he put together the Omega Gang, which was this gang that would handle humans after they've committed crimes against mutants. They would do it themselves, not in a poetic way, to say the least. They were like the super kid police. They even went to a tattoo shop and made it official. They got these Omega symbols tattooed over top of the X. Now his abilities are insane. He can manipulate your perception, judgment, wills, and common sense. He's able to track you down by listening to your thoughts, folks. Your thoughts, you can hear your thoughts. And even in this instance, if you were a telepath, you wouldn't see him coming because he would block out your powers to sneak up on you. One of the coolest things about Quentin is the psionic shotgun that he can create. It just looks cool. He just channels all this mental energy as this astral energy shotgun. And if that doesn't do the trick, the psionic rocket launcher should. Number 4, Kubark, aka Kid Gladiator, another kid. Kubark is the son of Emperor Gladiator. He was this young prince sent to Earth to train and discover more secrets about his powers. And the one place you go and do that is, of course, the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. Warbird was his bodyguard, and the reason that he was sent to Earth, this new kid on the block, was because he destroyed more than half of the Shi'ar royal city on Chandalar. Just for fun, you know? In Wolverine and the X-Men, he arrives and starts giving orders to other students, like to bring him snacks, the whole thing. And he wanted these students to call him their new Imperial Overlord. He's jam-packed with superpowers though. He can possess the ability to fly, and his eyes are pretty interesting, not just to look at. He has microscopic vision and can blast heat beams through those peepers. And with an incredible lung capacity, he can take in large amounts of air and blast it out, creating these hurricane-like winds. And if that doesn't work, he can use his breath to freeze you dead in your tracks. Number 3, Lifeguard, aka Heather Cameron. Lifeguard is such a cool character. Okay, let's talk about her. She's super unique. She made her first debut in Extreme X-Men issue 6, and judging by her name, yes, she of course started off as a lifeguard, and also as a surfer. Her mutant ability is that of a lifeguard. Literally, her powers allow her to manifest whatever is needed to save the life of somebody near her. If you're allergic to peanuts, bam, EpiPen, stab, we're good. She's like the super medic of the X-Men, she's awesome. After the events of M-Day, Heather was one of the lucky to retain her abilities. She's almost a combination of Darwin and Mystique. Now, I talked about Darwin in part 1 of this list, so if you want a little bit of catching up to do, you know where to find that. Number 2, Zeitgeist. Axel Clooney. He was seen in Deadpool 2, and he made his first comic book appearance in X-Force issue 116. His ability, let's just talk about it. He can spit acid, like a lot of acid. So much acid. It can eat through any substance, and I think what makes this character even more wild is when he himself discovered these powers for the first time. Oh boy, okay. He was at the beach hanging out, he met this lovely woman, they clicked, it was romantic, they were nice, they were kissing on the beach, and then all of a sudden, this happens. A lot of acid puke, real nasty stuff. Ugh. But this guy is super powerful, like he can take on so many mutants. I mean, it's gross, but if only he didn't spew it out of his mouth, maybe he had fingers that could do the acid shooting, he would be less of a gag. Pun intended. And finally, coming in at number 1, Jubilee. Making her first appearance in Uncanny X-Men issue 244, Jubilee, aka Jubilation Lee, first discovered her mutant power of generating these dazzling sparkles from her hands. She was always seen as this little sister type character from the start, but she packs a powerful, pretty punch. She was discovered by Dazzler, Cyclops, Rogue, and Storm during a rescue at the mall, and when she followed the women back through a portal, she ended up at the X-Men's temporary base in the Australian outback. Jubilee and Wolverine ended up becoming a good pair, working missions together, and they were a fun duo. Now her powers grew to a whole new level when a vampire ended up infecting the area of Union Square. This happens in Curse of the Mutants, and Jubilee, being caught in the path of this infection, ended up becoming a vampire. It was a pretty big deal. Even before the vampire stuff, this is a highly underrated character to this day. Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Blob. Fred Dukes, aka Blob, made his comic book debut back in Uncanny X-Men issue 3, and he got his powers when he was just a young man. He often looked at himself as this extra super strong freak of nature at this point, just this giant strong man whose temper often got the best of him. The X-Men met him at a carnival where he was using his might and muscle just to get by. And then when Scott Summers approached Blob and asked if he'd heard about the X-Men, he responds with, "Oh, those jerky juveniles in the corny costumes? Yeah, I've heard of those guys." First of all, rude. So he goes back and Charles has him tested. He has him pulling these massive chains so hard that he breaks these chains like King Kong. And then he starts to make a break for it, launching away any X-Men member in his path. So now he's gone, but now he knows everybody's real identity because he was there for a bit, and then he's like, yeah, you know what? I'm out of here. So Charles had to track him down and then erase his memory from his brain. I had to start with Blob because he was so close to being a member. So much potential, and then he ended up picking the wrong team 3 issues later. But we had him for a bit. And before we continue on with this list, if you guys haven't already, please go ahead and give us a thumbs up because it helps our channel out so much. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now back to our list. Number 9, Vulcan. He named himself after the Roman god of fire, but Vulcan's real identity was that of Gabriel Summers. He was born after Cyclops and Havoc. Well, not really born, he was surgically removed from his mother's body and placed in an incubator accelerator, aged to be at his prime, and then sent back to Earth to work for Devan Shikari. He then escaped and was found by Moira McTaggart with no memories of who he is or where he came from. He was impressing Charles quite a bit, and all he wanted to do was learn his mutant abilities. Sounds like the dream student. So Charles needed help from him and other newcomers to find the remaining X-Men after most of them had been depowered from the Scarlet Witch. So Charles put him in this danger room purely made of Charles' thoughts as a training exercise to get them sharp in a short amount of time. So inside it feels like months of training, but in actuality it's only a few hours. Then Vulcan and his new team were sent to Krakoa to rescue the original X-Men. But Vulcan revealed to Scott that Xavier sacrificed his own brother to save him. And then Kid Vulcan's true origins are shown, and in the next issue of Deadly Genesis, he's unleashed. Number 8, Frenzy. Joanna Cargill made her first comic book debut in X-Factor issue 4, when she accidentally punched her father so hard that her hand went through his chest. Now her father was by no means a good person at all, but I mean, doesn't mean he deserved to go out like that. Plus, finding out you're a mutant at that time in that way must have been pretty traumatizing. She became known as Frenzy, and she joined the Allegiance of Evil. After the Acolytes disbanded, Joanna became an ambassador for Genosha and stood by Magneto until she was captured by the US government in order to learn more about Magneto. But she didn't talk, she kept her mouth shut. Until Jean Grey entered and freed her, giving her the option to join the X-Men the easy way or the hard way. Jean used the hard way, and then Frenzy's entire attitude was changed, just like that. Her brain was different. Now her personality was campy, it was awkward, and not nearly as confident as before. But she did help the X-Men find Magneto's base. She was a team member, even if it was forced and awkward. After Magneto's defeat, her mind control was released and she rejoined the Acolytes and left the X-Mansion. Again, a little brief, but it still counts. Number 7, Caliban. An albino mutant and a former member of the Morlocks, Caliban made his first comic book appearance in Uncanny X-Men 148. He has the ability to track down any mutant, and he actually sacrifices himself in Logan, where he was played by the hilarious Stephen Merchant. Great film. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's on Disney Plus now, rated R. So good. He was originally an ally to the X-Men, so I'm gonna count him as a hero who switched over to the dark side. Because once he became a tracker for Apocalypse in X-Factor issue 24, titled The Fall of Mutants. So Apocalypse gave him extra strength and renamed him Hellhound, taking the place of the Horseman Death. Number 6, Gazer. Making his first debut in X-Men Volume 2, issue 169, Gazer met the X-Men when a Golgotha invasion was threatening Earth. He was alone on a NASA space station, and due to his mutant abilities, he was the only person that could withstand high levels of radiation. So when these creatures approached Earth, he told Emma Frost, and then the X-Men joined him in space on his observation platform. Again, he wasn't knighted with a sword and deemed an official X-Men or anything like that, no. But he's a mutant who works in space to keep our planet safe, and he calls Emma Frost. So call him what you want, but this man's a hero. He's a bored, lonely hero up in space. He's definitely an X-Men. I'll say he's an X-Men. But then after the events of M-Day, things changed, and so did his morals. He lost his abilities, so now he was experiencing horrible radiation sickness, so he decided to literally jump ship, wanting to go out there instead of passing away alone in here. Fair, I mean, sad, but also makes a lick of sense. It's kind of like George Clooney in Gravity, just floating out in space.
Houston, I lost visual, Dr. Stone.
But while he was drifting in space like a hero, Apocalypse came on by to save his day, thus becoming the Horseman War. Number 5, Sunfire. He made his first debut in X-Men issue 64. Shiro Yashida's mother passed away of radiation poisoning when he was still young, and Shiro was raised by his uncle Tomo to hate the West and return to Japan to their imperial days. So he trained for years and attacked America when the X-Men pulled up to put a stop to it. So Sunfire ended up taking out his uncle and returning to Japan, but then he was sent to destroy an American cargo ship, but then Namor turned him for good. Now he was Japan's protector. When most of the X-Men were captured by Krakoa, Sunfire was recruited by Charles to help. He was named as one of the mythical 12, representing the power of nature alongside Storm and Iceman. So far, so good. But then during a battle with Deathstrike later on, he was presumed dead after an altercation, and the X-Men couldn't find his body. But you know who did? Apocalypse. Yep. He was turning him into the Horseman Famine, and he kind of had control over it, kind of. So he wanted to stay and see if he could help out Gazer, who I'd previously mentioned up there, but they were sadly both turned by the end of the day. At least he tried. Number 4, Forge. Forge is a mutant and a tribal shaman who made his debut in Uncanny X-Men 184. He's known for creating these amazing inventions, and before he worked for the X-Men, he was fighting in the Vietnam War, where he would use dark magic to save himself. He rejected the life of a shaman in order to serve. He was able to create advanced cybernetic prosthetics to replace his missing limbs during all these battles. And then after the events of M-Day, Forge searched the multiverse to try and find other mutants. Then there was an alternate world of mutants at war with a group of artificial mutants that were created by Forge. So he was bad. He's a bad guy in another world. Brilliant mind, but it can get him into a little bit of trouble in some of these stories, especially the Ultimate Universe, where he literally sided with Magneto. And during this, he actually created a power amplifier for Magneto to use in order to flip the Earth's magnetic poles and take out every living being on the planet. So thanks, Forge. Really cool. You couldn't have made like an iPhone 14. Cool, that's good too. Number 3, Storm. Aurora Monroe made her first debut in Giant Size X-Men issue 1, and she's one of the more popular members of the X-Men, being portrayed by Halle Berry and Alexandra Shipp. She was recruited by Charles and she joined the team to save other original members from Krakoa. She was appointed leader after several years of work, and in X-Men Apocalypse, we see her recruited as a horseman. By the end of the movie, she betrays him and joins the X-Men because she's not a fan of how he treats her idol, Mystique. It's probably the only time we'll see Storm evil, at least in this live action run. But it was still pretty entertaining. It was nice to see a younger version of Storm, and then of course be influenced by Apocalypse. It was kind of cool. I could do with more bad Storm. I mean, you know, just for a little bit. Number 2, Lord Xavier. We can't forget this one, okay? He's also known as the Witch King, and you can see him in Volume 2, Issue 9 of Extreme X-Men. So the Witch King ruled over Genosha and sports a look that is very menacing, maybe Power Rangers. It's pretty badass, but also kind of Power Rangers. It's right in the middle. He has an army of orcs and beasts on top of his already spectacular abilities. And in this issue, we also see a few upgrades to the Professor, like concussive energy blast for starters. And in the opening of the story, we see him effortlessly take down invaders with machines, so it doesn't matter how you roll up to this fight, Lord Xavier, Witch King of Genosha, will take you down with his armies of orcs and beasts. Probably one of the cooler versions. Finally, number 1, Deadpool. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. It's such a blast to read, and I had to include it in here because it's so good. It's so Deadpool. The issue was released in August 2012, and just the front cover, you know what you're getting into. So what's the story here? What are we getting into? What happened to Wade? Well, his mouth wasn't sewn shut, and he didn't have swords for hands. Nothing like that this time, no. The X-Men put Wade into the Ravencroft Asylum in attempts to heal his insanity. The doctor, Psycho Man, was brainwashing Wade's in hopes to shut down all of his inner voices, which worked, but now all these voices were replaced with voices that were encouraging him to kill everybody in the Marvel Universe. So it went from bad to worse, and of course Wade's the one to do it. Right off the bat, the series draws you in. I mean, it opens with the Fantastic Four facing off with Wade. Reed gets left all rubbery and left for dead and lifeless. It's really gruesome, but also really fun. Not for the faint of heart, but definitely fun, and obviously super gory.